Harris's was a retail chain of department stores that opened in 1905 and closed in 2009. Harris's department store can trace their roots to Morris and Joanna Hershkovitz, who was born in a small Polish town in the province of Posen. Then, under the control of Prussia, the couple would have 11 children. The first of the children to immigrate to the United States was Lewin Hershkovitz in 1852 at the age of 16. He would change his name to Leopold Harris. With the exception of Leopold's eldest brother, Lesser, each of the siblings also adopted the Harris name. Leopold Harris first settled in Louisville, Kentucky, where his brother resided, but soon thereafter headed west in 1853. He engaged in a number of business ventures in San Francisco, San Gabriel, and San Bernardino. In the early 1860s, Leopold Harris decided that Los Angeles offered the better business opportunities. In 1870, he took over a Main Street stationery store which had been operated by Herman W. Hellman. In the 1880s, he established a retail men's clothing firm known as Quincy Hall Clothing Company, and it later became known as London Clothing Company. Leopold Harris was the first in Los Angeles to erect buildings on long-term leases, among those being the Allen Block, which he built in 1885 at the corner of Temple and Spring Streets. In 1887, he secured a 20-year lease on Spring Street lots and built the Salisbury Block. In 1898, he built the Harris and Frank building at 437 South Spring Street near 5th Street. He also made investments in sheep, which turned out to be a good stroke of business. He also operated a wholesale menswear company called L. Harris & Company. Harris was also the first merchant in the city to establish a line of credit with New York clothing manufacturers. His retail firm's name became Harris & Frank when Herman W. Frank, a highly trusted manager within Harris's business, married Harris's daughter, eventually developing Harris & Frank, one of the leading stores in Los Angeles. By 1903, Harris's son-in-law, Herman Frank and M.C. Adler, and his son Harry Harris were running the business. In 1905, Herman, Philip, and Arthur, with the help of Leopold, opened the Harris's department store of San Bernardino and would expand into the adjacent buildings. Their San Bernardino business would become the flagship for a chain of stores which would become synonymous with the Inland Empire of Southern California. Their first location was in the Armory Building at 462 3rd Street between D and E Streets. Harris was on the bottom floor and had a mere 25 feet of frontage. Philip and Herman began with $4,700 worth of stock from their store, the White House, which they closed in Santa Ana, an experience of working for their uncle Leopold of Harris & Frank in Los Angeles. They started their business with 3 employees, an office girl, and 2 sales ladies. Arthur Harris arrived in 1906 from his brother-in-law's store in Anaheim, bringing $2,500 with him. The money aided in the move to Harris's second location across the street from their original store. The Harris brothers hired a window trimmer along with a dozen employees and became the style center of the city. The Harris brothers quickly gained a favorable reputation and a loyal patronage from straightforward business dealings. In 1907, the second floor was taken over to house their growing millinery and ready-to-wear departments. The next year, Harris's installed the first elevator in San Bernardino, attracting a lot of attention. It was the first time for many to see one. An early employee recalled that the grown-ups humored the kids by taking them up and down. The brothers failed at a Colton location early on, but found another success in the 1908 opening of their Redlands store. The Harris brothers purchased the old Randall and Merriam dry goods store on Orange Street in Redlands in 1908. Needing more display space, the store moved to 17 23 East State Street in 1915. The store doubled in size in just 2 years, moving into the Smith Brothers Oriental Gift Shop. Although Philip served as president of the Harris Company in the early years, he spent most of his time at the Redlands Harris's department store. Philip Harris moved to Redlands to manage that store. By 1915, San Bernardino's Harris's was bursting at the seams, and they expanded into the Cartwright Dry Goods next door. They inherited their electrical sign and restrooms, took one wall out between the stores, and bought out their next-door neighbor's clothing store on the opposite side, which happened to be owned by their brother-in-law, Rudolph Anker. By 1919, Harris's management began to acquire land on the corner of 3rd and East Streets for the creation of a new store. While construction for the San Bernardino store was underway, employees eagerly awaited the move to the new building. A month before the move, the little business that started as a partnership of brothers became a corporation worth $1 million. The Harris Company graduated to the status of department store. Disaster hit the company on September 26, 1925, in the worst downtown fire on State Street, which leveled the store. Wasting no time, merchandise was transferred to Redlands from the other stores, and the store was back in operation the very next day. In 1926, the Redlands store was rebuilt and reopened on 17 East State Street as the new Harris's department store. They would open their new headquarters on November 7, 1927. Shoppers entered through doors of hammered copper into a lobby with a 32-foot high ceiling. The building formally opened on November 7, 1927. It housed a basement, first floor, mezzanine level, second floor, third floor, and a roof garden. The Harris Company was built as a fireproof structure that would include all of the modern amenities of the time. There was a tea room, lunch counter, beauty parlor, and a barber shop, a sit-down soda fountain, candies, stationery, and on the other side of the building, a grocery store called Sage's Market. The southeast corner of the building had a staircase of colorful tiles which led up to the second floor restaurant Cafe Madrid. The building's doors were made of hammered copper. The main entrance archway, fitted with Italian marble, rose 29 feet, while the interior lobby ceiling was an impressive 32 feet high. The exterior had an alternating intricate stone and wrought iron ornamental grillwork. The Harris coat of arms was molded within the stonework similar to businesses in Europe. The structure revealed a face to match Harris's reputation of quality and service. Many thought the Harris brothers were taking a gamble to build a modern department store in a city roughly 20,000 people. 3 years later, the risk was realized when the Great Depression began closing banks across the country. Herman and his nephew Leslie devised a plan to save at least one of the banks that backed Harris's. Throughout the day, regular deposits were made for the Harris Company, and employees were sent over to open new accounts. Philip's 3 sons, Leslie, Harold, and Melville, had been raised in the business since childhood and were the next in line to be at the helm. The second generation of the Harrises successfully continued management of the Harris Company and ushered in a period of significant growth. One program initiated by the trio was in the late 1940s, which was called Men's Night. One shopper recalled only men were allowed in the store to shop for Christmas gifts for their wives, girlfriends, children, and others. It was great fun, and the clerks, mostly older women, were a tremendous help. Many Inland Empire residents had the tradition of stopping by the Harrises to see the Christmas windows. Additionally, for many years, the Harrises had the only Santa in the region. Numerous children met their very first Santa Claus at Harris's Toyland. In 1947, the up-to-the-minute store gained the Inland Empire's first escalator. Originally dubbed a motor stairs, it created quite a stir since the closest alternative was an hour away in Los Angeles. In the family's first big expansion, they built a 204,000 square foot store as the anchor for the new Riverside Plaza shopping mall in Riverside, California in September of 1957, the first large non-downtown shopping destination in the entire area. Harris brothers, Leslie, Harold, and Melville, eventually had stores in Colton, Indio, and Lake Arrowhead. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, due to the Central City redevelopment program, major changes occurred at the San Bernardino store. The 1927 floors were taken out and retrofitted, the upper floor windows were infilled, and lightweight concrete was used to build a fourth floor in order to relocate the executive offices, formerly on the mezzanine level. The majority of the mezzanine level was removed, though Cafe Madrid, gift wrapping, and alteration facilities remained. When the Central City Mall, later the Carousel Mall, opened in 1972, Harris's was incorporated into the footprint of the mall with an entrance from the enclosed center. But by the 1970s, the city of San Bernardino began struggling economically during the recession. The Harris's family third generation, Harold Jr., or Hap, son of Melville, William Engel, son-in-law of Harold, and Bennett Myers, son-in-law of Leslie, sold the chain to El Corte Inglés, a Spanish department store chain. It was at this time in 1981 that the Spanish retailer acquired the Harris's company and its 9 stores that included Bakersfield, Hemet, Indio, Moreno Valley, Palmdale, Redlands, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Victorville. A final crushing blow to the local San Bernardino economy came with the closing of the Norton Air Force Base in 1994. Harris's merged with Gottschalk's in August of 1998, and the chain rebranded as Harris's Gottschalk's. 2 Riverside County locations, one in Indio and the other located in Moreno Valley, California, as well as locations in Bakersfield, continue to use the Harris's Gottschalk's name. No other locations use the Harris's Gottschalk's name. Harris's flagship store in San Bernardino closed 4 months later on January 31st, 1999. Just 10 years later, as a result of the Great Recession, Gottschalk's had to liquidate in March of 2009. Going out of business, sales for the chain ran for several months and ended in July of 2009. You may think that's the end of the story for Harris's. It may be, but what about the original stores? In 2024, the company contacted City Hall in mid-February. That was after a deal to sell to developer Alan Stanley fell through. Stanley owns the 7-story Enterprise building, originally the Andresen building at 320 North E Street. Stanley stated that picking up Harris's would have made a lot of sense because the ties between the Harris and the Andresen families and the similarities of the buildings. Both were built in 1927, same architect. These 2 buildings have always been synergistic, Stanley said. They would be stronger together. Stanley bought the Enterprise building in 2017 for $2 million and had spent $2 million on renovations. He had a deal in place for Harris's and had been in escrow for 15 months. He had agreed to buy Harris's for $3.5 million. Needed renovations would have cost $10 million, in part due to the damaged interior. His plan was to restore the exterior and the first floor for retail use as the first phase for about $3 million. Then in subsequent phases, turn the upper floors into live work lofts and boutique hotel. The sticking point was that it didn't have any parking, Stanley said. I didn't want a 270,000 square foot building without any parking. After fruitless attempts to lease an empty lot for parking, Stanley walked away from escrow. The offer by El Cortes Inglés to City Hall soon followed. Joked Stanley, there was nobody else in their right mind to buy it other than me. Now, about the interior, Harris's was apparently mostly intact until 2 years ago, but when people started breaching the long-closed mall, they made their way into Harris's too. Copper wiring was stolen, as were brass valves from the sprinkler system. The building flooded for weeks from the top floor, seeping down every floor to the basement. Carpets are moldy, drywall and ceiling tiles are gone, insulation was set on fire to burn it away to expose wiring. In Cafe Madrid, swivel seats were yanked out so that the vandals could steal the iron rods. The seats were then politely placed upside down on the counter. Even the elevator doors had been stolen. Every storefront window had been broken, Stanley marveled. They even stole the granite off the facade. In July of 2024, a fire damaged a large portion of the former department store, known as the Harris's Building in San Bernardino, on July 8th. During the more than 7 hours it took to extinguish the flames, several homeless occupants of the 4-story, 270,000 square foot building were located and successfully evacuated, and none of them reported any injuries. The historic structure had been closed since 1999 and had been sitting there abandoned. Today, the former Harris's buildings, seen here in downtown Redlands, another location would probably be considered a Gottschalk's, which was located at the Redlands Mall in Redlands, California. Another location that was a Harris's and would change their name to Harris's Gottschalk's was the one in Moreno Valley. I was able to visit the mall where they still had the name on the outer doors to the closed up former department store. The former location has not been occupied since 2009. I recently visited the former 60,000 square foot Harris's in the city of Indio. The location was at the Indio Fashion Mall, which opened on February 24th, 1975. It became a Gottschalk's in 1999 and closed sometime later. It is currently occupied by a Harbor Freight in what is now called the Indio Grand Marketplace. Last but certainly not least was the third location of the Harris's department store. This location was built in 1957 at the Riverside Plaza and was over 200,000 square feet. The former Riverside Harris's was renovated in 2014 after the closure of Forever 21 in early 2013. It is now occupied by a Nordstrom Rack, Marshalls, and a Joann Fabrics. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Thanks.